Hello there, people. Sorry I'm late. The Shed Broadcasting Company would like to apologise to all viewers for any inconvenience. Right. Hello there, people. How are we? So, what's happening this evening? Me and Gav are just going to have a wee presentation of, some of the things that we understand so far in the journey so far. It's just going to be a relatively short presentation, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this hangout and I'll start another one up using the OBS so that we can have an open platform. Obviously, I have to do that because the Globe cult and its disciples have a fetish for porn bombing hangouts, and we can't have that. So we'll be having a wee presentation here, and then I'll start another hangout with the OBS so that anybody can join. Please feel free to join. The link will be posted in the chat, but after this one. So I'm just going to send that to Gav. And for anybody new, I'll just go through a wee quick explanation of who I am and what this is about. So you see in the title Flat Earth. Flat Earth was simply adopted by me because at the time it was a trending term, and it was being hijacked by various different factions and used in order to pump and muddy the waters with propaganda, misinformation and all the usual drivel. There is no flat earth map model. I do not represent or claim any of them true. I am a realist. I'm just a man who was born into what I consider a cult that is called the Globe cult. The claim made to me from an impressionable youngster through my adult years was that I lived on the exterior of an oblate spheroid zipping through a vacuum at hundreds of thousands of miles per hour. Now, I reject that based on me becoming a direct realist and taking the word science and stripping it apart. So a scientist or science for me is simply a human being using the apparatus they were born with, what the constitution they were born with, your senses, in order for you to understand and perceive the very world that you're living in. So science does not belong to an institution or any exterior authority or other human or other entity. It is my tool, my discernment. I decide what is real and what is not. And the way I do that is what is observed in my objective reality. So when I have other human beings making claims to me about the substances in my objective world, those human beings are duty bound to practically demonstrate to me. Practical demonstration does not mean showing me an image through a video on a TV screen. That is not what I consider direct realism or science for that matter. Now, these people have been showing me these images my whole life. And when I became a direct realist and eradicated the belief and faith that I had in my mind, I started to pick apart the belief structure that I held since a child. I started to realise that it was impossible for me to be living on the exterior of an oblate spheroid for a number of reasons. The number one reason is that the place is covered in liquid water. That water has very definite characteristics to it. That being and explained as water will take the shape of its container. The surface will always equalize, will always be a horizontal plane. Unless, of course, we have winds or currents, which causes a motion on the surface, and then we get waves and we get swells. But the body as a whole is contained and level. You cannot take a body of water and bend the sides downwards and see the bend upon the surface of the water. That is retarded, an absurdity, an insult to the natural world. And I use these phrases very lightly, like natural, and I'll extrapolate on that later on by what I mean by natural. So for people who are new to this, I'm sure that you're coming across a lot of propaganda, a lot of nonsense and idiotic claims that are being made in regards to what flat earth is. Well, you don't get that here. The claim is a globe. That's what I deal with. My claim is that the earth is demonstrably level. There is no curvature anywhere, and the abundant substance that I find in the world tells me that it's level beyond any shadow of a doubt. Not only that, the instrumentations that we use for construction and navigations that we have done for however long assume a plane beneath our feet, not a sphere. The only thing that is treated as a sphere is the sky, an imaginary sphere that has been termed the celestial sphere. That's it. In order for something to be true, as a direct realist, you are duty bound to demonstrate in a practical fashion to me. So when people tell me bodies of water do have the ability to bend and maintain rotundity and bends upon the surface, and they can't demonstrate that to me, there's a problem. So where do I go from that realization that it's not a globe? I do not then look for a comfort blanket, some other belief system to replace the faulty structure that I had before. I'm now in a position of, I do not know the full dimensions of this place that we call Earth, how far it extends, what its limitations are, and if it is limitations, what extends beyond it. None of that is known. In order to establish that, and for me, my stance is full exploration. No limitations to where we can go and explore. But we have limitations and restrictions. We have borders, border controls, passports, restricted areas. You need to ask yourself why that is and who has the right to try and dominate over other human beings. Because I don't consent to any of it. And I'm tired of it. What you call a life, your culture, your ideas, your concepts are just that. They are concepts. They are not true. They have nothing in the way of something, you know, the bigger truth, with the objective truth of your existence. That is what I'm trying to establish. That is all I care about. I do not want a substitute. I don't want a trinket, a shiny toy to distract me. I want to know the truth. Where the fuck am I? And I encourage you to have that same, and I encourage you to have the same no-nonsense attitude and passion to establish that, not only for yourself, but for the ones that you care about, the ones that are going to come after you, if you have kids right now. Do you want them growing up in a life of confusion? A flawed psychological foundation of their existence? A hairless monkey zipping through the vacuum on a potato rock? That's just not true. It is a psychological tool to disempower you and to give you a false sense of your existence. You think you live on a little delicate rock with limited resources, and it's so delicate that it could end at any moment, and oh no, it's a big drama. That's no good for anybody. You think there's nothing else. You're going to sit still and accept the bullshit that surrounds you, feeling powerless, like there's nothing you can do. That's not the way it should be, in my mind. In my mind, we should know where we are, who we are, why we are here. Something has happened in the past that has severed that knowing, and there's signs of it everywhere. There was advancements before us. I don't know what happened, but I'm determined to find out. My stance requires more numbers. My stance requires individual critical thinking people, not people inducing fallacious reasoning, listening to authority, being swayed by consensus. I don't give a fuck about any of that. It's time for you to stand up and be counted. Or you can be intellectually lazy and dishonest with yourself and allow the shit to perpetuate. I choose not to. So, don't come here with preconceived bullshit and expect me to answer to that bullshit. The globe answers to me. That's the claim that's being pushed. That is a claim that is being pushed, and the hassle and annoyance that we people like me have had to put up with for 4 years now of zealot culty behaviour because you reject their cult beliefs. I'm not here to defend and answer anybody's fucking questions. I was born into this, and the claims will answer to me. There is no proof that you live in a globe. It's no real. The sooner you accept that, the better it will be. Dragging your heels and taking a tantrum and pointing your finger at people like me is not going to help. So pull your wee socks up, grow a set, man up or woman up, whatever, not to be sexist. Right? Let's sort it out. So anyway, me and Gav are going to have a wee look at previous and what is going on and what's been established. So, Gav, are you here yet?
I am indeed.
You're right.
I am sound.
Good.
Hello to everybody.
Aye, I'll never even go to the chat box. I'll deal with the chat box once we get to the next hangout. As I say, we're just going to have this wee presentation and a bit of chit chat here, Gav.
Yep.
We'll cut off and I'll start back up with the OBS so we can open up.
Yep. Sounds like a plan.
Mm-hmm. So,
let me just share my screen, will I?
Go for it.
Just dive right into it. You need to do anything on your end?
No. I am presenting you now, so your screen's stuck on. So just make sure you don't flash anything because we're not on the OBS here, Gav.
Yep. You know. Right. Got you. I will, to be quite honest, Del, nobody puts it quite like you, my man. It's direct, it's straightforward, it's simple to understand. Yeah. So, my presentation hopefully adds just a little bit to the whole journey so far. We're just going to go over some points, right?
Yeah.
But I recommend anybody looks at any of your hangouts the first 15 minutes to get the basics. Yeah.
The repetition.
So some of this might be repetition, but this might help newbies, and we can put this presentation up afterwards. And as you say, it's a separate video then for folks who want to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Aye, well, I mean, I just get back to the main. I still remember very well watching your very first video, Del, out in the pouring rain, pouring water on a ball. And that was the time when I said to myself, I need to speak to this guy, I need to go to your next hangout. And I think that's how we teamed up, 2016, I think it was. It's what, now 3 years or 2.5 years at least, I can't remember, to be honest.
The time is, I'm losing time. Just to add in there, Gav, you're talking about the first video. Just for anybody who's new and seeing this again, of course. Now, what I was doing in that first video with the ball was not trying to accurately represent the globular Earth. That was just a bit of tongue-in-cheek. What the point was to highlight the behaviour of liquid, as Gav is here in the first one.
Oh, absolutely. It's just to highlight the fallacies of it. And I remember you actually saying, which I burst out laughing, was, I'm embarrassed, but not for myself. I'm embarrassed for all of you that think water can bend. But anyway, that was the start of our little journey to, me coming to BTIC anyway. So, so what I wanted to just highlight here is how far is everybody, right? Where have we got to in the last couple of years, yeah?
Yeah.
And I think now everybody completely comprehends that water does not bend, right? I mean, it's a known fact, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to repeat what you say, Dale. As I say, people can look back on it. But, I just think it's a given now. Nobody in their right mind thinks water bends. Nobody's ever came to prove it, demonstrate it to us, apart from the usual meniscus and bullshit arguments, right?
Yeah.
And we know that contradicts space completely then, right? Because the images that they show us, right? Example, the blue marble is a contradiction of this known fact. Mm-hmm. Pressure requires a container, the other big one, right? You can't have two separate, pressure systems without a solid separation, right? Yep. Again, another clear proof, clear evidence that what we're being told in terms of space can only be science fiction and stories, right?
And that's it. And you know, and we don't go by what we see in the screen. You know, first and foremost, we understand reality as direct realists and the substances and their behaviours and relationships to each other. We don't throw that out and try and express a new language to describe and explain it away. That's not how it works. You don't make an image and then start trying to change the laws of physics and substances to support your image. No, if the image is contradicting observed, you know, known practical reality, there's an issue with the image. So people need to sort that out in their minds first and foremost.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, everybody's seen the NASA fakery out there, right? Where it's obvious CGI and tricksters, and you know, without getting into any of these details, there's so many inconsistencies, right? And if you want to believe in what they're saying, then it requires a belief in images, and you have to ignore practical demonstration or the necessity for practical demonstration. So that's the only way you can believe any of this crap, right? That water bends, that you don't need a container, or that they're floating about in space at 17,000 miles an hour, right?
Exactly. And if you take the steps from 1 to 2, you know that about your reality. You can then commit, which should then take you to the steps. Okay, now I know that these people are lying. Then you, if you want to prove it to yourself further, you can go about and see the obvious fakery within, you know, the images and the videos that they're showing you.
Exactly. So I like this quote here: "Phenomena of nature are real facts from which we may justly argue against any hypothesis. To argue from a hypothesis against facts is contrary to the rules of true science." And that's basically all we get, right? We're coming from a natural facts, right? We can observe nature, we can demonstrate it, it's practical. So we can argue against any bullshit that people tell us if it is not in our direct reality. All they have is the ability to come up with a hypothesis and try and push it against the facts. And it's not even fucking science what they're doing, Del. It's just fucking fairy stories, right?
It's total sophistry. Yeah, that's why they continually focus on the persons and you know, argue and insist from, you know, authority and consensus and, you know, all the bullshit, the fallacious reasoning processes. That's all you're going to get from the globe cult.
Yep. Absolutely. So, I mean, basically, I think one of the hard bits is when people come to the flat Earth, it's giving up space, right? Yeah. Because that is such an indoctrinated school, you know, cartoon from childhood, right? Yeah. Everybody loves a bit of space and science fiction, right? Yeah. You know, Guardians of the Galaxy or whatever takes your fancy. And that, I think, is one of the hardest parts, that people have to give up that notion and they clamor far too hard. Yeah. But
sorry. Just what I want to add in there is, for me, you know, that's been sold because as part of the human nature is to explore, to question, and to endeavour to find out more. So by offering you a narrative of space and the possibility of further exploration that's not attainable to the common man, subdues your ambition and desire for further exploration. Because, as I said at the beginning of this, you now think that there's nothing else to explore, there's nothing else to discover, it's all been figured out. So right there and then they're cutting you off from ever pursuing a further understanding of where you actually are.
Yep, and at the same time giving you ideas and fantasies to cling to as if they mean something, right? Yep. To impede your creative exploration. Yeah,
exactly.
But as we know, it's a belief. It relies on logical fallacies, sophistry, appeals to authority, etc. So, you know, I don't think, I'm just showing a couple of pictures here to cement what I'm saying, you know. I like the ball in the water, and, you know, water always takes the shape of its container. Pressure systems require to be contained, you know. All this is known to us. So I think everybody now comprehends those facts. They comprehend that we're being told nonsense, You know, we're taught to, you know, it's just as much use me asking how the Star Trek warp drive functions as asking NASA to explain the cosmic event horizon, right? It's basically the same nonsense, by the way, I've been banned from Twitter. I think I told you that for too much shag tagging, obviously.
You've got your wings. You've got your ban wings. I'm banned on Facebook at the moment.
Well, fuck them.
Exactly.
A couple of the things that I think that very importantly this platform has brought to the table, and not that I'm trying to steal any accolades, but I want just people to realize, you know, the things that have been, how should I say, brought forward, and where I think people now comprehend as well, or what they comprehend. One is this whole topic around direct realism versus idealism, right? So, you know, your direct reality, that which you immediately apprehend, yeah, which is direct, which has to do with substance, with practical, with demonstration. That is what you have to weigh against idealism, which is all about ideas and concepts and the mediation of things, and it's all very indirect. So yeah. I know that's a tick philosophical, but I do think, you know, because I've said this before, philosophy is a foundation of an attitude, of a culture, of a thinking of generations that influences science. So yeah. You have to look at the philosophical aspects of things as well. Yeah. We've talked about this a many times, Del, objective versus subjective, right? Yeah. You know, people will bring emotional appeals, or they'll bring up particular things like, you know, maybe specific imagery shot from a specific target angle, right? Yep. And they'll take these, you know, single musings or fantasies, and they will try and sell them as universal propositions, right? And that's not what objective reality is about, you know. You can't do that. If you've got a subjective opinion, then fine, class it as such. Yeah. And that goes into my little quote: I would discourage no man from conjecturing, only I wish him not to take his conjecture for knowledge or expect that others do so, right? Because all these, you know, subjective perceptions is where the whole debating nonsense comes into it, right? There is no debate. No. There's only a discussion that we can have about reality. Yeah. And your, you know, emotional, subjective, all these things don't mean a thing, right?
It's a huge aspect that people really need to understand, the separation of their subjective desires, beliefs, wishes, and what is objectively true. And just as you pointed out, and I said that again earlier on today, you know, there only is one reality. We're not talking about an idea that's to be won or lost from two opposing factions. There only is one, and we can only understand it, find out what it is by exploration, by practically demonstrating our findings to each other, and that is it. There is no debate required, no debate tactics or layout necessary at all.
Yep. And I also think this is where people have to be wary. You know, when subjective opinions come to it and you're having debates about these kind of things, and that's when personalities get involved, where people maybe have false motives for doing things, right? You can only debate objective reality. I don't think it should be monetized. The truth is the truth, right? And that's the way it has to be as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly.
So I then come to the question that, you know, how can so many people be deceived and deluded, you know? So what goes wrong? Why is it possible for them to tell us all these stories, right? Yeah. So once you realize that you're being told a fucking fib, then one of the things you have to do is, well, let's stop this ever happening again. You know, how do we unwind it? How do we decipher it? How do we decode it? How do we teach our children differently, right?
Exactly. Just as you have there, one of the main realizations for me was exactly that. You know, again, coming from a lack of proper education and no even understanding, you know, you can see it through the methods that they've used, where they always invoke this word science. It's just science. It's science, science, science. But there's subdivisions of science that you have to understand. And for me, it was a huge revelation when I realized this. And just as Gav has here, you know, separating the natural, the formal, and the social sciences. So I'll let Gav, you can continue on.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's part of the trivium, as we've pointed out many a time. You know, I'm glad to see lots of other people, good people, looking at it and explaining it in more detail. But yeah, grammar, logic, rhetoric is one of the ways that they can basically divorce us from what I would see as our natural language, Del. Yeah. The ability to see and hear and touch, which is something we can all do without having to speak a word. Yeah. Yeah. And using language basically to implant ideas in our heads. Yeah. Yeah. And obviously the formal sciences, you can categorize mathematics as a language. We've said that a lot of times, and all these things, you can then build narratives on assumptions and axioms. Yeah. Yeah. One of the ones I like is this, you know, circular reasoning. You know, that's a typical fallacy that they love to use, you know, where they say, okay, you know, how can an eclipse be possible if it's flat? But what they don't realize is that they're already presupposing space balls getting in the way of each other and using that assumption to then go on to say, well, one space ball's getting in the way from each other, the shadow's curved, i.e. we're a space ball.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just pure circular reasoning, right?
And because they have a story and you do not have an answer, they somehow then insist that that lends weight to their belief, which it doesn't. Again, you know, things like that in no way, shape or form give you anything discernible or measurable about the shape or dimensions of the earth beneath your feet.
Absolutely. That's where the next one maybe plays a bigger role. So the redefinition of a word like level, which the mathematicians and geometricians have taken to be the tangent line to a perpendicular going to the center of gravity, of a presupposed spherical earth. So even though they want to redefine words and meanings to, if you like, deceive us, delude us, you know, and whether it's intentional or not, I don't care. But it's just the way it is. And what I'm trying to do here is dissect it. So we need to be very careful on words. Apparent is another one. You know, appear means the angle subtended at the eye. So there's lots of these words where you have to be very careful. And when you recognize the real meaning or the true meaning, then you can start to cut through the bullshit of sentences and paragraphs that they write. Yeah.
Because I just want to stick in there quick. Words have that power. You know, words give you a concept, an image, and if a word is backed by an image, it creates a certain blueprint in your mind, if you like, and then your relationship to words automatically invokes particular images. So for me, it's a huge aspect of what has been done.
Absolutely, and I think that's summarized the same in the quote, just slightly differently. Okay. Nature speaks the same language and uses the same signs in the same circumstances, but we mistake the meaning of the signs either through ignorance, or through ignorance of the circumstances. So if we don't realize we're being told nonsense, then the things signified by these things in our head are not the actual things that we're seeing. So we don't see bendy water, right? They can tell us as much as they like that we are, and we can choose to believe them. But if we choose to believe them, then we're giving away our, sole right to be able to, search for ourselves.
Not only do you not see bendy water, you don't see the bending of the earth anywhere either. You just believe it's there, and it's not there.
Yeah. So I hope that the platform Beyond the Imaginary Curve has done a lot to help people see through these fairy stories, and how grammar, logic, and rhetoric is used against them.
Yeah.
Couple of, I'm just throwing a couple of pictures in to cement the point again, all fallacies, all logical fallacies, it doesn't matter what they are, can be subsumed under the word ignoratio elenchi. That is basically the main category of fallacies. There's a whole bunch of them on the left that everybody's probably come into contact with them. The globe cult religion uses and needs all of them to perpetuate their myths. If you're a direct realist, you don't need any of that at all. You just go by practical demonstration and what you can show to each other.
Exactly. The direct realist, somebody who accepts their objective reality, doesn't need any of these terms because you're not laying out a debate platform. You're just exploring the world you live in. And as Gav said earlier on, we don't need language for that. I can go to any country in the world and I can demonstrate how a liquid behaves, and the people in that other country are going to understand exactly what I'm showing them.
Yep, absolutely. You can point and gesture and demonstrate, and that's all you need. You don't need words.
No.
Yeah, again, I mean, I've said it, ignoratio elenchi and first principles. So one of the biggest things is do not start a conversation with somebody if you do not agree on first principles. If two people start off with different ideas of how they want the foundation of their physics or their maths to begin with, then these two people are going to talk past each other all day. Yeah. So you have to be very careful and bring people back to first principles. Yeah. And I think an important one is this idea that you cannot talk about the qualities of things without attaching them to a substantial body. Right? I cannot talk about the qualities of something without a something being there. And that's what's very often done. We can talk about fairy dust and gravitons and all kinds of nonsense, but there is no something that I can grab on, that I can hold to, that is tangible, substantiable, and to make that true. So what you can't do is let people get away with that. You can't let them assume something in a proof that you deny or that you think is further from the truth, right? Because if you start that way, you can't have a discussion with these people. In fact, it's useless. Yeah. Yep. And I've put up a Thomas Reid quote that I think signifies that very well. I'm not going to read it out. People can look at this presentation afterwards. Yeah.
Excellent.
So what else have we done? Well, I think we've pointed out very much that we can trust our common senses. So, we've been schooled, all of us, to believe that we can't trust them. We're told stories about optical illusions, that it's all in the mind, that it's psychology. Yeah, and we're supposed to believe that our constitution is fallacious, that we have senses that deceive us, and we have other senses that are able to detect the cheat, which is just so laughable. It's not true.
Well, it's laughable because it's coming from other human beings who have the exact same senses as we do.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, common sense is justified and warranted as far as I'm concerned. It's the basis of all knowledge. If you don't have your common senses, you cannot build any reasoning on top of this. Reasoning is more the intellectual part, the rational mind, right? Whereas common sense is maybe, you might say, subconscious, or, it doesn't necessarily involve reason to see a self-evident truth, yeah? But if you don't have that basis, then you can't reason at all, because you don't have a brain, a body, or anything else to actually work with. So it's preposterous to think that you can just do away with your common senses and still have knowledge.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, in regards to the previous thing about the senses and these people telling us that they're fallacious, but I'm pretty sure you have a visible, tangible thing coming up. So I don't know if I'm preempting it. I'll just wait until that comes.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I mean, common sense is what gives us, obvious propositions deduced from self-evident truths, and reason is what we then build on these simpler propositions to get even more remote conclusions. So again, I just want to reiterate, without common sense as the foundation of all knowledge, you wouldn't be anywhere, right? You wouldn't be able to have a mathematical conversation if you didn't have your common sense to begin with. So people can't just wash it away and pretend that the senses are untrustworthy. You use it to get up in the morning, to cross the road, to cook your meal, everything in life. So it's completely nonsense to think that that they don't work. Yeah. We don't spin. I mean, a good one is this water bending of a stick. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. If I look at a stick in water, it appears to be bent. People will say, "Ha, look, your eyes are deceiving you." No, what I say is my eyes are very correctly alerting me to the fact that there are two different mediums at play, air and water, and that an object has a different appearance in both. There's nothing wrong with my senses. It's telling me exactly that there's two mediums in play. And that's the way people should look at it, and not that it's an illusion.
Exactly.
Yep. So this is one of the, typical things where, they've tried to replace common sense. Apparently we don't recognize spin. Yeah. Apparently, buckets of water can go on a string, and these are analogous to the way gravity works. Yeah. Although we don't feel any pull. Yeah. So yes, objects fall a certain way, but that, again, has nothing to do with the shape of the earth. So all these things are fallacious. And there's a nice little quote here. Again, I'll leave it in the presentation for people to read. There's other people over the years have said the very same thing, that, basically they got a free hand to debauch the intellect of the layman as often as they wished, especially after they told us that common sense was nothing we could depend on. So when we give away that common sense, then that's when they can tell us even bigger fairy stories. But I think BTIC has done a great job of pulling common sense back into the conversation. Yep, and the other one that I think was important, and you've just mentioned this, was the whole differentiation between visibles and tangibles. Now, this is not just about perspective, right? I see too much of it focused on a small part. Yes, perspective is the way to delineate three-dimensional objects onto a two-dimensional paper by way of mathematical rules. But what I mean here is the whole philosophical concept between discerning that a visible is not the same as a tangible, that you have to discern between the two, and you have to look at both of them as separate objects of reasoning and even of mathematical reasoning. And that's where, you know, you can start to see that the geometries of spherical and non-Euclidean have very much to do with your visual perception and how your eye works. Yeah. And for me, there's a big distinction between perspective and natural perspective, which I say is how we view things directly, direct vision.
Yeah.
And if you look carefully at some of the things that have been produced or created, some of the content, then you'll see how all this ties into the nonsense they tell us about astronomy, the celestial sphere, how navigation works, how geodesy works, how sundials and clock works. It's all to do with the fact that our visual perception has been hijacked, if you ask me, and being used to tell mathematical stories about a supposed surface, that curved surface that we live on. Yeah. So I hope now that this differentiation is pretty clear to everybody, right? You know, I mean, I see people jumping on it, and there's lots of people who have done good work on it, and I think it's a super important topic, and it goes so deep that, you know, it's not just about, you know, things get smaller in the distance. Yeah. There's way more to it than that. And it's also not yet an absolute accurate science, right? There's so many things happen at that convergence line, whatever you want to call it, atmospheric conditions, you know, the workings of your eye, how light functions, so how instruments, you know, whatever instruments you're using. So, you know, there's a whole lot of work still to be done there. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. But it can come under the, you know, we start from the premise, obviously, of knowing that if you know, we're observing things over a body of water, first and foremost, we have to understand and agree that we know the physical behaviors of that substance that we're viewing over.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've done a couple of pictures in here again just to cement the overall picture. You know, there's a difference between tangible objects and the visible objects. In the bottom right hand of the screen, you can actually see the figure and the extension and the shape of things as they are seen by the eye. And you can see that they are different. In fact, they follow the rules of spherical geometry. If people look on my channel and other channels, they'll find information that will help them understand that better. And why things disappear bottom up is also explained, because not only is it to do with the fact that we're very close to the surface down here, and the angle in which we see horizontal spacings becomes so small as to be indiscernible. That's where this convergence happens, right? Where things get swimmy and unfocused and disappear, and again, there's already been a lot of information on this out in the network nowadays that I think everybody now understands that that has everything to do with vision and nothing to do with the curve of the Earth. I'll just skip over that, but what I wanted to say here very briefly is that it's actually mathematically or geometrically demonstrable that it is not possible with your eye to discern how far away something is or how close it is. So you might have, I've said this before, depth cues, which allow you to discern how far away something is based on experience or practice or coloring. But just from a purely geometrical point of view, you cannot determine the difference. And you can see that by this yellow line here and this yellow line here. They're both going to give you the same shape on your eye, so you don't know which one is which, right? And that is demonstrable. And not only is it demonstrable in terms of mathematics, it was also a widely held belief in the 1700s by most of the mathematicians and geometricians at that time. So again, I think it's been hijacked. And people need to differentiate between what is the geometry of touch. So tangible geometry is all about measuring things with respect to each other, but the geometry of vision is all about measuring things in proportion and intervals to your eye. And that is the big difference that people need to realize, and that you can't apply one geometry when you actually want to use the other one. And that's where these things have a swimmable line where they cross over from one to the other and don't tell you properly. And that's why it's so easy for geodesists or astronomers to believe that these really are big space balls in the sky. And the one thing that, so we've looked at, language, we've looked at discerning, using common sense, we've looked at differentiating visibles and geometries. And what I want to highlight is one of the topics that I'm working on, and I think is still the one that needs to be hacked apart, is this whole definition of quantity and measure. what does quantity mean? What does it mean to quantify something? And what does it mean to measure something? And I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of presentations on the stuff that's in here, explaining how mathematics is really all just about ratios. I've put in brackets 6 or half a dozen. I can tell you a story using the number 6, and I can tell you a story using the number half a dozen. And they could be 2 different scales, 2 different ways of measuring, and I could tell you 2 different stories. And that's what mathematics does.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely fundamental to the so-called scientific method. So I see a hell of a lot of, online shows talking about the scientific method where I think they're still missing the point. They're not going back to the first principles of what the scientific method is, why it relies on quantification, and only when we get back to these first principles will we be able to actually uncover the delusion. Until then, we're going to be arguing on a path that's already been predetermined to be part of some kind of debate. So I'm going to be doing some presentations on this stuff, also on the definition of what a force means. There's a huge controversy between Leibniz and Newton, which I hope will expose exactly what is the definition of a force. Because without looking at that definition, you won't be able to tell the nonsense from the bullshit either. The other thing that I'm going to be looking at is geometry and physiology. So how does geometry actually tie into our constitution? So the way our eyes work, all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to explode quantum mechanics because as far as I'm concerned, these are just micro space balls telling us the same bullshit in small that they tell us in big. And I'll be pretty explicit about how I'm going to do that maybe then in the future.
Exactly. Yeah. Good.
Just one thing, just before, and this is the last slide, Dale, and then we can wrap it up. But just so that people understand where this is going, I'm just going to read from a Wikipedia definition about quantity or about quantification. So in mathematics and empirical science, quantification is the act of counting and measuring that maps human sense observations and experiences into quantities. Now, people need to really think about that sentence, what it means. When we're talking about what common sense is, differentiating visibles and tangibles, and our senses being part of our constitution and how we understand the real world, then please notice that the scientific method has already defined what that means, right? So they're taking a definition of what human sense observations and experiences mean, and they're wrapping it into their definition of quantities. And that's the thing that needs to be looked at. That's where we need to go back to and say, has that quantification in those terms actually been done correctly? Me personally, I don't think it has done. And I think it's all to do with the way ratio is used in mathematics. And I hope to explain that in better detail going forward.
Excellent.
I'm just going to flip to one thing here right at the end. So this is the ancient way people looked at quantities. They had lines, surfaces, solids, duration, and number. And if you look to the right-hand side, we now have 7 units: kilograms, meters, seconds. So meters and seconds has stayed. That's here under durations and length. But surfaces and solids have disappeared. Number is not mentioned anywhere. And all these other things, kilograms, moles, amperes, kelvins, candelas, they all use ratio, right? And that's where I want to decipher some of this, right? So that people get back to the roots and understand that these base units have all to do with how mathematics manipulates a ratio. And I'll leave it at that because it would take too long to go any further, but just so that people know where this is going. And with that, I will stop my sharing. And hopefully that's a little presentation that people can take away and look at, or a little short video.
Excellent, mate. Excellent. So the other aspects, obviously, of the journey is some of the kind of social type aspects of the characters that you're going to meet online, and some of the games that are being played. So, again, going back to the beginning, it's a lot of that stuff should be irrelevant to you, but I know people do get caught up in it. For me personally, I use some of the characters in the games that they display. so that I can highlight it and give examples for people to reflect on. So you have people on both sides of the false dichotomy, globe, flat, concave, whatever it may be. My call has always been, look, there's a serious lack of understanding amongst people about the actual world they live in, regardless of what you believe it to be. So my experience going out into the street is realising the real lack of understanding of what people believe to be true. So for instance, if I've got somebody in the street that tells me they believe it's a globe and ask them why, they really don't know why. Now, for me, that's alarming. So my call was, look, at the end of the day, regardless of what anybody believes, this could be resolved and beneficial to everybody, because for me, human beings should have access to a proper education and be able to discern and make their own minds up. If we're talking about objectivity, there should be no deception. Nobody should have a problem with what I'm actually saying here. Everybody should be looking to push for that to happen so that people are more critical about where they actually live. So people are no, so they're being pulled from pillar to post and they're being played at a social level. They're being appealed to on an emotional level, psychological levels. Games are being played about focusing on people's character or personality or how they look or, you know, whatever else. None of that has anything to do with objectivity. We're talking about the objective world that is impersonal. It's got nothing to do with characters, skin colour, religion, politics. None of that. It's irrelevant. So when you see people who are trying to perpetuate those games that relate to the things I've just listed, there's an issue. You need to remove your attention from it and get back to the focus, which is about objectivity. You're trying to ascertain and establish what the truth is about your objective world. So people need to be aware of these types of games. And people like me, Gav, and many of the other people here have experienced it tenfold, you know, from globe cult disciples to professed flat earthers, all spewing jargon and bullshit at each other, you know, getting personal, pulling people into camps and, you know, organised groups and whatever else. There's so many games online that for me is treacherous and can waste a lot of time. So keep it simple. You're the direct realist. Science is in your hands and it's up to you to discern what you accept to be true and what you don't accept to be true. That's not going to come from some external authority. That's your power. It's up to you to make the decisions. So
very well put. Nothing to add. Let's just close it there so that people have a nice short video they can refer to.
Excellent. So what's going to be happening now, I'm going to have a wee quick 5-minute break just to nick to the toilet, and I'll stick the advert up right now for say 7:10. So now we're going to have an open platform and anybody's free to join. I'm sure, Gav, you're going to come back and join in again.
I will do. Yep.
But see you in 10 minutes, people.
All right. See you, man.
Cheers.